Okay, so we're on chapter 6 now, practicing strategy. And chapter 6 is an interesting chapter because it pays attention to the element of the learning organization. In the past, we've often asked students to define what a learning organization is. And often the confusion has been to equate the idea of learning typical to what you are doing currently as students. Well, there are elements of similarity. I think what we are merely talking about is the rate at which or the way in which an organization takes up information from its environment and uses this information to be able to establish a path for itself. Now, this also includes a track record of information, a reputation that is created when an organization seeks to be always responding, and using those points of reference as a way of pathing a way for the organization. So put simply, really, the idea of a learning organization is this idea that an organization is able to use information to its disposal by establishing a clear track record of aspects that it can use to be able to respond to a range of challenges and scenarios that it is placed upon. In looking at the learning organization, our focus really is in explaining some key important outcomes. Why should we be concerned about organizations being classified as learning organizations? What is the fuss about the learning organization? How does all of this link to this idea of KM, which is knowledge management, and explaining how organizational learning takes place in view of all the things that we are aware of that characterize the organization. And so we're going to answer some of these questions, or if not all of them, in this chapter, and paying attention to ideals of learning. Now, this obviously links very well with the other chapters that we've covered so far, because the language and the terms that we'll be adopting will be language and terms that have come from these chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and now chapter 6. So there are 5 key elements in this chapter: the importance of organizational learning, the barriers of learning, how individuals learn, transfer of knowledge to others, and how an organization becomes a learning organization. If you look at it, the importance of organizational learning is embedded in the idea that learning should be shared as a practice that an organization should be constantly doing. In as much as we as individuals learn, we also need to understand that organizations also have a point of reference from which they can also borrow their experience from. So the idea of organizational learning, as much as it is similar to the idea of how we as individuals learn, is never ending. It's cyclic, it's rotational, and it's experimental, because some of the learning that happens is not pre-programmed. In other words, it is something that is unique, that happens within a particular organization, and that requires some form of unique response as of that time. Sometimes the response is good. Sometimes the response is bad. And we then learn from that period of how either bad or good the response is, and we use it as a basis for positioning ourselves and moving forward. The issue for me, when we look at the importance of learning, we must also try and talk about learning as a transfer. And by virtue of a transfer, we're talking about it happening from one individual to the other, or from one organizational entity to the other. In other words, organizations are disseminating across their unique experiences some form of lesson point that is used as a basis of the unique scenario and situation that they are facing. Learning in this context is acquired. And one of the key things is knowledge management, which is really the way that we manage information within the context of the workplace. So learning, therefore, allows the organization to be able to do certain key things. The first thing it needs to do is to adapt and be responsive to environmental changes. Through this adaptation and response, some form of flexibility and agility is attained, which then allows the organization to be more strategic in its orientation. Learning, particularly for the organization, entails activities such as opportunity and sense making and reaction to the threats that are happening. Remember, threats are constantly happening. When we looked at the SWOT, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, threats are constantly happening within the organization and outside, as a response of outside actors as well, and environmental situations, some of which we may not have control over. All of these then lead us to be driving towards quests for superior performance. Not always easy, and look, through the ability to emphasize organizational learning, we are able to respond better to this. So organizational learning allows us to be able to have a better responsiveness to issues. We are then able, within organizational learning, also able to acquire knowledge, to understand what is happening throughout, and to acquire a range of challenges that are specific to the issues that the organization is facing. And knowledge becomes an important currency through which decisions are made. From this, because it's an occurrence that through which decisions are made, we are then able to then solve problems depending on the nature of the problems that we are facing. Ultimately, this leads to innovation. Innovation becomes crucial. Innovation becomes important because innovation allows us to be able to bring in new ways of responding to challenges, or unique ways of responding to challenges based on the quest that we have and the knowledge that we have acquired. So learning is therefore then critical and crucial for the individual as much as it is critical and crucial for the organization. We must also look at some of the barriers that limit the experience of learning. Now, these are barriers that are specific to the organization, barriers that are specific to the context in which the organization is located in. These are barriers that are really self-made in some cases, but barriers that are also resulting from challenges that are happening, particularly when you look at the uniqueness of the situation that we are facing. Some of these barriers include what we call the dominant general management logic, which is this idea that really stems from managerial response. This is how we've always done things. This is how we should always respond to things. And as a result, managers therefore become trapped into this way of thinking, which is this management logic. Whereas the response should be a response of saying, well, let's try and see things differently and not always rely on how we have always done things. And this can act as a barrier, particularly stemming from the managerial point of view. It also results in other things like ignorance. Ignorance becomes a common thing because ignorance therefore means that we are not aware of the other. And because we are not aware of the other, we are definitely going to be thinking in pushing one dominant logic pattern of thinking. And this one dominant logic pattern of thinking then robs us and traps us from experiencing what the other could be. And so what we try to say here is that managers should try and treat each situation in its uniqueness and its responsiveness. Yes, they can borrow from how they have responded to a certain challenge in the past, but they should also try and see it as unique in its own context and responsiveness. The barriers of learning, again, issues of absorptive capacity. This refers to the ability of an organization to recognize the value of new external information, to assimilate it, and to use it to address. It's really challenges related to information retrieval from the environment and how that robs us from making key important decisions, which are based on facts and sound issues. This is a strategic capability and really differs from the organization to organization, the absorptive capacity. But what we are trying to say here is that organizations should be in the business of making sure that the absorptive capacities are responsive and are attentive to the challenges that assist in the development of a competitive advantage. And this will allow for more dynamic response within that particular context. So sort out your absorptive capacity, which is the rate at which you can understand information and take information from the environment in response to the challenges that were faced. And the absorptive capacity really talks to two things: acquisition and assimilation. Let's start with assimilation. Assimilation is really your ability to be able to analyze and make sense of the information that you are taking in. So this is what we would call the sense-making process. Whereas acquisition is your ability to acquire that information. So two key issues here: how we acquire information and how we process this information. This becomes crucial in positioning a way and a path in terms of the direction that we ought to take as an organization. So we need to sort out our absorptive capacity, because when we do that, we're then able to respond to the challenges before us. Absorptive capacity and assimilation and acquisition also talks to transformation of knowledge, which is really linked to the first two, but looking at combining this knowledge with what is already existing in the organization, and being able to use this as a point of reference, and being able to be open to the reality that we might be in need of learning from this unique situation, because the last time we tried to solve the situation, the information that we had was not enough to be able to solve this challenge. Then we also have the issue of application, which is also crucial. Now organizations are appointing people who they would call the knowledge managers within the company. And these are people who are not only tasked with the acquisition of information, but also tasked with making sure that that information is used for the benefit that it's supposed to do. So all of these are potential barriers that we can face with regards to learning. When we learn as individuals, let's try and do a mirror of how individuals learn and what organizations learn. When we learn as individuals, we pay attention to certain things: concrete experience, how we think and reflect on information, how we conceptualize information, and also particularly how we experiment with this information. So we then give you tasks to say, go and solve this particular task by looking at it from the point of making sure that you are sorting out the responsiveness of that particular task. Now, that's crucial, because what makes this crucial is that organizations also go through the similar process, because they also work with information. They also work with information that is either tacit or explicit. Tacit talks within, explicit talks about it's written down, everybody knows about it. And in them doing so, the transfer of information within organization happens as a result of certain activities: socialization, how people interact, particular within an organizational point of view, combination of activities, how we can mix and share, particularly knowledge that is written down. So we may say the policy says you need to take 14 days notice to be able to apply for leave. Somebody then, through the mixing and sharing, might come, well, the policy also says that the manager can use discretion. So the sharing of information and the combination of approaches really helps us to be able to critique what is written down or what is explicit. Internalization, in terms of this, it really explores the relationship that can happen between what is out there and what is within the people, or implicit within the people. This includes being part of the being of the person and using it, and saying really there is a link between how we as the individuals and the organizations ought to respond to the challenges that are before us. Finally, articulation is really allowing what is inside to be expressed outside. And this is really allowing individuals to be able to form part of the experiences of what is written down. Now, all of this is critical because it tells us how knowledge works with individuals. The same can also be thought within knowledge in organizations. And this brings us to a crucial element here, which just simply seeks to answer the question, how then does an organization become a learning organization? And borrowing from the foundation of how individuals learn, some suggestions can be made on how an organization can become a learning organization. Some of these suggestions are suggestions that are embedded within the literature. Some of them are borrowing from experiences of how other companies have experienced these. Some of these suggestions have to do also with best practice. The first of these we can look at is for an organization to become a learning organization, there must be a commitment to learning. By commitment to learning, we're simply saying that we must make sure that the leadership is channeling all forms of efforts in making sure that the organization is committing itself to platforms related to learning. Problems and successes therefore begin with top managers filtering all of these down to say to the employees that we are aware of the challenges, and what we would like to do is to make sure that we are committed to aspects related to learning. Leaders therefore should demonstrate commitment by being role models of learning, championing learning and using learning strategically for the purpose of the organization and its benefits. The second thing that we can do as a sign of our commitment to becoming a learning organization is building on shared visions and making sure that everybody is in sync with that which we are trying to achieve. Everybody is in sync with that which we have tried to mandate ourselves as critical in addressing our efforts. And so leaders, again, like in the first point, leaders then should come in and try and seek to develop genuine visions to inspire people to be committed to aspects of learning. This vision is not dictated. This vision is bought in. In other words, it's employees must be consulted thoroughly, and it mustn't be seen as imposed, but it must be seen as to be one which is, I mean, the idea is it's built in. So in other words, there's shared vision around it. We must also empower people towards a collective vision. The collective vision involves them setting the vision and distributing the responsibility to everybody. And the people, therefore, should be motivated to not only learn toward what the vision is about or the idea of becoming a learning organization is, but develop some form of accountability that sees them taking ownership to this shared vision. The second point, encouraging diversity. Let's make sure that people from similar backgrounds, similar cultural groups that are in the organizations are helped and assisted in the way in which the differences that they may have in seeing how different organizations react. Now, this is crucial because everybody's got a different way of seeing certain things. Diversity becomes important because it's a platform through which we can allow different people to be able then to say, this is how we proceed going forward. So diversity in the organization, specifically within the top management team, is therefore encouraged. The more divergent the views, the more they are likely to influence each other's mental models and effect change. And I think the positive here is to say we can realize benefit from having people who have different opinions to the dominant view that others may have. It also helps in avoiding things like groupthink, where people just arrive to a meeting and everybody seems to see things from a similar way. Sometimes the alternative also helps us to see things in a different way. We must also be encouraging something called double loop learning. We learn continuously by questioning and seeking to understand. If you go back to how when we discussed how individuals learn, double loop learning is a process really of making sure that we learn to unlearn and vice versa. And the process really here is creating a mental model of self-reflection, a mental model that allows us to not just see things from one side of the table, but also see things from the other side. Now, if you're a marketing team that's about to come up with a new strategy and you've got an advert that you want to run, and then you say, okay, how do we see this advert? And now this has happened a lot, particularly in the South African context, where we are also have heightened sensitivities around the past, issues of ethnicity, race. You must also have in your team to say, okay, it's important we also see how other people from the other side of the table might view this advert that we all agree is a perfect advert. In the recent years, we've seen quite a lot of adverts being recalled, quite a lot of brands coming up and saying, we recall this position, we regret we made this statement or this particular advert because we did not see or did not emphasize this double loop learning of seeing things from the other side. We also need to develop a systems thinking ability. The systems thinking ability is the idea that makes sure that we see things within a system format of inputs, processes, and outputs. So we need to see things holistically as part of a big picture. Systems thinking refers to an understanding of how all of us are connected to the world and all of us how we make sense of this world. So people should be assisted to see the effect of things holistically and not just see it as part of a segment of one unitary part of the perspective. While we're at it, let us also encourage individual and team-based learning. Individuals must have the ability to be able to, chart out and lead out their own ways and paths that they may be following. So we need to commit individuals to make sure that they commit to the cause and the task before. Work is therefore designed around this idea of personal mastery, encouraging enrichment across different types of people, and making sure that we allow people the ability to be able to fully express themselves within the organization and to be able to fully develop the ability to create the desired results they want as being part of the team and also as individuals who may have different opinions. We must also legitimize dissent. What do we mean here? Well, what we simply are referring to here is we must also try and see it as normal when somebody has a different opinion to what we may be thinking. So in legitimizing dissent, what we're saying is that allow for people who have differences of opinion to also have their views be heard on the table. This includes encouraging a culture of dialogue and debate and making sure that everybody in the organization plays with this part of the program. Encouraging experimentation, and experimentation here we are talking more or less about the importance of trying out, seeing and trying to see whether alternatives can be created by constantly seeking for ways of trying out and reaching out in terms of the processes that are before us. Now, sometimes this may include cost implications, but prototyping can also work where people try out, and then this is then magnified to a larger audience for implication. Another way we can become a learning organization is encouraging what we call a community of practice. This is a term that is also coming from the education literature, which is really this community that is there to help and support the functionary of learning. So the community of practice is the building block across the organization that is used to make sure that all our efforts are seen to be encouraging the purpose and the reason why we exist as an organization. We can do this through sharing of information, people being given voice and allowed to express themselves, artifacts of learning such as documentation, tools and processes, and these are available to everybody to be able to use as a point of reference, and constant interaction and exchange between members and parties to a group. Linked to this is the idea of collaboration. Collaboration allows us to act and interact with partners inside the organization and outside the organization to be able to promote what we stand for. Collaboration is really all about becoming more and more common to the means of fostering how we learn in an organization. And the specific mind of collaboration is one that cannot or will not, that challenges issues that impede collaborative efforts between partners and sharing of information between partners. Ultimately, we become a learning organization by strengthening this idea of knowledge management dynamic capabilities. Dynamic capabilities are anything that an organization does well in its power to be able to be better. And we become better by strengthening those aspects in the organization that assist us to acquire information. This includes the points of assimilation, acquiring, the transformation, how information is exchanged within existing knowledge platforms. So the management function really here is the knowledge management function. And like I did say to you, some organizations are now employing people who are mandated and given the responsibility of being knowledge management workers, particularly managers within the organization, because of the importance that is being assigned to this role of managing knowledge. So the big picture really is that learning is important, learning is crucial, and if we are going to learn and if we are going to find platforms of learning that work for us, we must find platforms that address barriers that are stopping us from acquiring information to become better. I want to end by an illustration which I think is crucial. Somebody then told me that the easiest way to explain what learning is to imagine this as a sponge. And as this is a sponge, when the sponge is dipped into water, the sponge takes up the water. And when the sponge takes up the water, and when it comes out of the water, one can squeeze the sponge and the water comes out. And that's exactly an easy way of trying to simplify it, maybe, of trying to see what learning is about. It's really how an organization within a context assimilates and takes up things within its environment, immediate environment, which is its organizational environment, and also outside its environment, particularly considering the external environment and all its challenges. And that is what learning and what the learning organization is all about.